Hey guys, tonight we drift into the winding, dimly lit streets of a medieval city. The smell of wood smoke and tallow candles mixes with something less pleasant, the kind of scent you'd rather not identify too closely. Cobblestones glisten faintly under the lantern light, catching the glimmer of the moon overhead. The air is thick with the murmurs of late-night voices, the occasional bark of a dog, and the muffled clop-clop of hooves on stone. You are here, but not quite safe. This city is a place of shadows and sharp corners of guild power, and whispered deals of laughter from alehouses, and the constant risk of disease. In other words, you probably won't survive this. But that's half the fun, right? So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from somewhere else in the world, post your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing how far this sleepy little channel reaches. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step into the city as if you've been here before, though the year is somewhere around 1350, and your modern mind is still trying to process the strangeness. The first thing you notice is how cramped everything feels. The streets are narrow, so narrow, that if two carts meet, one has to back up until there's space to pass. The buildings lean toward each other, as if conspiring, their upper stories jutting out above the ground floors. On some streets, the houses almost seem to touch at the top, leaving only a slice of sky overhead. It makes the daylight dimmer, and at night the darkness presses in like a damp blanket. The city is alive with noise in a way you didn't expect. There's no steady hum of traffic, no constant electric buzz, but instead the uneven rhythms of medieval life. Somewhere to your left, you hear the dull clanging of a blacksmith at work late into the evening. To your right, a baker is sliding tomorrow's bread into a wood-fired oven, the smell teasing its way through the cool air. From an open tavern door, a wave of heat and sound spills into the street, the chatter of merchants and laborers, the wheeze of a fiddle, the scrape of a stool against the floor. The ground beneath your boots is uneven. Some cobblestones are missing, and in the gaps, muddy water collects in shallow puddles. You step around one instinctively, though the truth is there's no real avoiding the mess. Every so often you spot a gutter running down the middle of the street, and it carries with it a sluggish flow of rainwater food scraps and other things. You remind yourself that the word sanitation won't mean much for another few hundred years. By day, the streets teem with merchants hawking their goods. Picture narrow stalls wedged between doorways, each piled high with something different. Bolts of wool in earthy reds and browns, baskets of onions and leeks, barrels of salted fish, strings of dried herbs. The sellers shout over one another, vying for your attention. Fresh herring pulled from the sea this morning. Wool from the best sheep in Flanders. Onions. Cheap onions. Cheap. It's a kind of chaos that you can't help but be drawn into, though you keep a hand near your purse, not that you have one. But the instinct feels natural here. And yet, despite the bustle, there's an undercurrent of danger. In a city like this, everyone knows their place, and knows when someone doesn't belong. Watchmen patrol the main streets after dark, carrying lanterns and cudgels, but they're as much a part of the city's politics as they are its safety. A friendly nod to one man might earn you protection. A wrong word to another could mean a long night in the stocks. And if you wander too far into the alleys, the watchman might not follow you at all. The houses themselves are fascinating, each a kind of layered history in timber and stone. The lower floors are often made of stone or brick damp and cool even in summer. Above that, wooden beams crisscross over wattle and daub walls, their plaster painted in faded colors. Roofs are steep and covered with wooden shingles or clay tiles, depending on the wealth of the household. Inside, you'd find small rooms, low ceilings, and windows covered not with glass, but with oiled parchment that lets in a muted, buttery light. Most people here live and work in the same place. If you're a shoemaker, the front room of your house is your workshop with a small counter where customers can step in from the street. If you're a baker, your oven is just behind the shop front, so the smell can lure customers before they've even reached your door. And if you're a merchant with goods to store, your cellar serves as both warehouse and family pantry. Privacy in the modern sense is rare. Life is shared, layered, and constantly in view of your neighbors. Food is both familiar and foreign. Bread is the staple eaten at nearly every meal, but the type depends on your status. The wealthy might enjoy fine white loaves made from sifted wheat, while laborers make do with dense, dark bread of rye or barley. Stews simmer over the fire made with whatever's in season: onions, turnips, peas, bits of salted pork, or if fortune smiles on you, fresh meat from the market. Cheese is common, as is ale, which is safer to drink than most water. In the wealthier districts, you might catch the scent of exotic spices, cinnamon, ginger, saffron, brought in through long, dangerous trade routes and worth their weight in silver. And then, of course, there's the less glamorous side of city life. Waste is a constant presence, and the city's system for dealing with it is, well, primitive. Chamber pots are emptied into the gutters sometimes from the upper windows, with a shouted warning that might come too late. The gutters run downhill toward larger ditches or streams, but the smell lingers everywhere. Rats thrive here, darting through alleyways and across market squares, bold as you please. They're part of the landscape, and no one really bothers to chase them anymore. Disease, too, is a shadow that never leaves. In your own time, you might know of the Great Plague, the Black Death, which has already swept through Europe not long ago. The people here remember it vividly, and though the worst has passed, outbreaks of various illnesses are still common. A sudden fever, a strange rash, a cough that won't go away. Any of these could mean the difference between life and death in a world without modern medicine. And yet, life goes on. People marry children, play in the streets, and markets open each morning, as if nothing could ever truly disrupt the rhythm of the city. Night in the medieval city has its own rhythm. Once the sun sets, most honest business winds down. Tavern doors stay open, spilling laughter and the smell of ale into the street. But shop shutters are pulled tight. Lanterns glow in a few windows, their light flickering against the dark timber frames. In the poorer districts, darkness swallows the alleys, completely broken only by the occasional torch carried by someone with urgent business. It's quieter, but not silent. You hear the distant creak of a cartwheel, the mewl of a stray cat, the sharp call of a nightbird from somewhere beyond the walls. As you walk, you become aware of the walls themselves, massive stone fortifications that encircle the city. By day, the gates are busy with travelers, traders, and farmers bringing in goods. But at night, the gates are shut and barred, and the city is sealed off from the outside world. You are, for better or worse, part of it now, enclosed within its crowded streets and tangled lives. The night air feels cooler here, carrying with it the faint scent of fields beyond the walls, a reminder that the world outside is both close and impossibly far away. Somewhere a bell tolls the hour, its deep voice rolling through the streets. You can't help but feel it. The city is alive, but in a way that makes you both a participant and an observer. The cobblestones under your feet, the smell of baking bread, the creak of shutters in the wind. All of it is weaving itself into a tapestry that will carry you deeper into the heart of medieval city life. And so you keep walking, letting the sound of your own footsteps guide you further into this winding, timeless maze. You follow the winding street until it spills into a small, irregular square, the kind that has been shaped less by design and more by the slow push and pull of centuries. The stones here are worn to a soft gloss by countless footsteps, and the buildings huddle close, their upper stories casting a protective shadow over the space. At the center stands a tall stone cross, its edges smoothed by weather, surrounded by a low, circular platform where people sit during the day to trade gossip or rest their legs. By night, it's empty except for a stray dog sniffing hopefully at the base. In the morning, this square will come alive as one of the city's smaller markets. Picture the stalls set up like makeshift umbrellas, each draped in patched canvas to keep the sun or drizzle off the wares. A woman selling eggs from her chickens will sit beside a man hawking small wooden spoons, their voices overlapping into a pleasant murmur of bargaining. Children weave through the crowd, carrying baskets, some tasked with errands by their parents, others hoping to find a sweet or a heel of bread if they linger near the baker's long enough. But now, with the square quiet and the air still cool from the night, you can hear the faint sound of water trickling. A public fountain stands at one corner, its stone basin worn smooth. This is where people come to fill their buckets or jugs for drinking, cooking, or washing. The water is cleaner here than in the gutters, though still far from pure by modern standards. You dip your fingers in and feel the cold bite, a small reminder that nature's hand still controls so much of life here. The fountain is also a place of conversation, a social hub disguised as necessity. Women gather here in the early mornings to draw water and swap news, whether it's the latest prices for grain or whispers about a neighbor's daughter's upcoming marriage. These casual exchanges knit the social fabric of the city tighter than any official decree. You notice how the rhythm of life here isn't marked by clock time alone, but by the unspoken schedule of shared spaces like this. As you move on, you pass by a row of modest shops still shuttered for the night. Painted signs hang above the doors, a pair of shears for the tailor, a boot for the cobbler, a mortar and pestle for the apothecary. Many people can't read, so symbols speak louder than words. In a way, these signs are small works of art, carved and painted to catch the eye of passers-by. The apothecary's shop, you note, would be a place of both wonder and wariness. Inside shelves hold jars of herbs, powders, and unidentifiable substances, all carefully labeled for those who can read them. Remedies here are a mixture of genuine herbal knowledge, superstition, and guesswork. For a cough, you might be offered honey mixed with ground fennel. For fever, perhaps a tisane of willow bark. But you might also be told to carry a small charm or to sleep with a sprig of rosemary under your pillow to ward off illness. Science is still tangled with folklore, and few question it too closely. Past the shops, the street widens into another thoroughfare, broader and better paved than the twisting lanes you've been navigating. This is one of the main arteries of the city, the kind that merchants prefer for their carts and wealthy citizens for their walks. Even now, a few late-moving traders trundle by their wheels, rattling in a steady rhythm. The sound echoes between the buildings, and for a moment, you feel the pulse of the city, steady, dependable, like a giant heart beating underfoot. Your eyes are drawn upward to the imposing shapes of larger houses along this street. These belong to the more prosperous townsfolk, master craftsmen, successful merchants and officials with influence in the city council. Their facades are cleaner, their timber frames straight and proud, their doors reinforced with iron studs. Behind those doors lie rooms furnished with carved chests, painted walls, and perhaps even a few precious items of silver. The smell of beeswax polish lingers in their halls, a quiet sign of wealth in a place where even the smallest luxury sets you apart. One of these houses has a small private chapel built into its side, a reminder that devotion is woven into every thread of daily life here. Religion shapes not only the calendar, but also the city's skyline. If you follow this main street far enough, you'll see it dominated by the great cathedral or church, its spire rising like a needle toward heaven. Even from here, you can catch glimpses of it between the rooftops, an ever-present reminder of faith authority and the collective effort of generations. The cathedral is not just a place of worship, it is the city's anchor. Its bells mark the hours calling people to prayer, to work, or to rest. On feast days, the square before it overflows with processions, music, and bright banners. In quieter moments, you might find pilgrims kneeling before relics, their murmured prayers mingling with the scent of incense. The cathedral's great doors, carved with saints and scenes from Scripture, swing open to reveal a vast interior where candlelight flickers on stone columns that seem to stretch forever upward. But the city's life isn't all piety and solemnity. Around the edges of the cathedral square, traders sell holy medals and ribbons, beggars ask for alms, and children chase one another in the crowd. It's a place where the sacred and the everyday mingle without much fuss, each sustaining the other. As you leave the main street and wander toward the river, the air shifts. You smell dampness, a faint fishiness carried on the breeze. The river is the city's lifeline, a route for trade, a source of water, and unfortunately, another channel for waste. The docks are busy during the day, with barges unloading goods from upstream and small fishing boats returning with their catches. Men in rough tunics haul crates and barrels, their shouts blending with the slap of water against wood. By night, the docks are quieter, but not deserted. A few torches burn here and there, casting long ripples of light across the water. You hear the soft creak of moored boats shifting with the current. Somewhere nearby, two men are talking in low voices, their words indistinct, but their tone carrying a hint of secrecy. The riverfront has always been a place where business, both legitimate and otherwise, can be conducted away from the eyes of the city watch. The warehouses that line the river are massive, their thick walls and barred windows designed to protect valuable goods. Some smell of spices, others of damp wool or salted fish. If you were to walk inside, you'd find the air thick with dust motes drifting in the torchlight, the silence broken only by the occasional scurrying of a rat in the shadows. Beyond the warehouses, you catch sight of the city's watermill, its great wheel turning slowly in the moonlight. The mill grinds grain into flour for the city, and its steady clatter is a constant backdrop to life here. Millers are not always the most trusted folk. Their trade gives them plenty of opportunity to skim a little extra from each sack. But they are necessary, and so they endure their position secure despite the grumbling of their customers. Crossing a narrow bridge over the river, you glance down at the dark water moving beneath you. Reflections of torchlight tremble on the surface, and for a moment the sound of the city fades. All you hear is the slow rush of the current, a sound that has whispered through this place for centuries, long before the first stone was laid in the city walls. On the far side of the river, the streets are narrower again, the houses more modest. This is where many of the city's craftsmen and laborers live close to their workshops and far from the more prestigious districts. The smell of tanned leather drifts from one building, the metallic tang of worked iron from another. These trades keep the city alive as surely as its markets and its rulers. As you wander through these quieter streets, you sense the closeness of the community here. Neighbors know one another by name. Children play together in the lanes, and gossip travels faster than any official message. Life may be harder here, but it is also more tightly bound, each person part of a network that has to be relied on in times of trouble. Somewhere in one of these cramped houses, a candle burns late into the night. Inside, a weaver bends over her loom, the rhythmic clack of the shuttle marking the slow passage of hours. In another, a cooper mends the staves of a barrel by firelight, working carefully so that no drop will escape when it's filled with ale or wine. In this part of the city, work never truly ends. It simply shifts from the public street to the private hearth. The streets here carry you onward deeper into the living memory of the medieval city, where every wall and paving stone holds the trace of countless footsteps before yours. And you, a quiet observer from another time, are slowly learning to walk among them as though you've always belonged. You turn a corner, and the street narrows again, funneling you between walls so close you could reach out and touch both sides at once. Overhead, a wooden beam connects the upper stories of two buildings, bridging the gap like a handshake frozen in time. Beneath it, the air feels different, trapped slightly warmer, with a faint smell of herbs drying somewhere above your head. You pause for a moment, noticing how the ground dips slightly here. In heavy rain, the water would rush down toward the river, carrying with it stray scraps of straw petals from the market stalls and whatever else the city has shed. In drier times like tonight, the dip makes a little hollow, where children might play marbles or where a street dog curls up to sleep. A door opens nearby, spilling a wedge of lamplight into the lane. A man steps out, his tunic belted tight against the night's chill, and empties a bucket into the gutter. The sound of liquid splashing onto stone makes you instinctively step aside. He glances at you briefly, then closes the door again without a word. That's the way of things here. Politeness is often reserved for those you know. Further along, you hear a low hum of conversation. It's coming from a small alehouse tucked into the base of a crooked-fronted building. The door stands half open, and through it you glimpse a room lit by firelight and thick with smoke. Rough-hewn tables are crowded with townsfolk, men and women, both their cheeks flushed from drink and laughter. A fiddler scrapes out a tune in the corner, his bow moving in jerky bursts that match the beat of stomping feet. You catch the scent of roasted meat, tangy with vinegar, and herbs mingling with the sweeter smell of ale. Inside a place like this, news travels quickly. Merchants fresh from the road share stories of distant towns. Craftsmen discuss prices for wool and leather. Gossip flits from table to table like a mischievous bird. Deals are made here, sometimes sealed with a handshake, other times with nothing more than a mutual nod. The alehouse is more than just a place to drink. It's the city's informal council chamber, its rumor mill, its comfort in hard times. Leaving the warm noise behind, you wander on until the sound fades into the soft shuffle of your own footsteps. Ahead, a small shrine juts from the corner of a building, sheltered under a wooden canopy. A painted figure of the Virgin gazes down from within her colors, dulled by candle smoke. In front of her, a little shelf holds offerings, a sprig of rosemary, a small loaf of bread, a stub of candle half burned. People pass here daily, bowing their heads or making the sign of the cross. In a city where misfortune can strike suddenly and without mercy, such gestures feel less like piety and more like a quiet bargain with fate. From here, the road slopes upward, leading toward one of the city's higher quarters. The climb is gentle but steady, and as you ascend, you notice the houses changing. They grow a little larger, their facades better kept. The timber is straighter, the plaster cleaner, the shutters painted in cheerful colors. In the windows of some, you spot a faint golden glow, candles still burning, perhaps for late reading, or for the comfort of children afraid of the dark. Near the crest of the hill, you come upon the smell of bread again, fresher and richer this time. A bakery, still warm from its ovens, sits tucked between two houses. Through the open shutter of the serving hatch, you see neat rows of loaves cooling on wooden racks, their crusts split to reveal soft interiors. Behind the counter, the baker's apprentice works quickly, stacking the bread into baskets, ready for delivery at first light. Bakers often rise in the middle of the night, their work timed, so that the city wakes to the smell of fresh bread. From this vantage point, you can see across the city's rooftops. The moonlight silvers the tile and thatch, picking out the lines of chimneys and the occasional wisp of smoke from a banked hearth. Beyond it all, the dark hulk of the city walls curves in a protective embrace. Here and there you see the watchfires burning along the parapets, their orange glow a quiet reassurance that someone is keeping guard, while the rest of the city sleeps. Descending the far side of the hill, you reach another gate, smaller than the great main gates, but still flanked by sturdy towers. This one is closed for the night, the heavy timbers reinforced with a crossbar thick as a man's arm. A watchman leans against the wall nearby, his spear resting in the crook of his elbow, his lantern casting a circle of light on the cobbles. He eyes you briefly, but says nothing. Beyond the gate, the road would lead to farmland and smaller villages, places that feed the city's markets, but seem a world away when the gate is shut. Circling back toward the heart of the city, you find yourself near one of its many craft districts. By day, the air here would be full of hammering sawing and the rhythmic scrape of tools against wood or stone. Now it is quiet, but the smell of worked materials lingers, sawdust warm from the day's labor and the faint mineral scent of chiseled stone. In the dim light, you can make out the outlines of half-finished pieces, a carved lintel for a wealthy merchant's door, a set of barrel hoops awaiting their staves, a stack of roof shingles ready for the next building project. Craftsmanship is a matter of pride here. The guilds that govern each trade are powerful, their rules strict. To sell your work in the city, you must belong to the right guild, and to join a guild, you must train for years as an apprentice under a master. That apprenticeship might mean sweeping the workshop floor for months before you even touch the tools, but it is the only path to mastery. Once you have earned your place, you gain not just the right to work, but a community that will defend your interests and in turn expect you to uphold the guild's honor. As you walk, you pass a row of apprentices' lodgings, small shared rooms above workshops where young men and women sleep in narrow beds after long days of labor. Some might be far from home, sent by their families to learn a trade in the city. Others are local, their fates tied to the neighborhood they grew up in. Each carries the quiet hope of one day becoming a master in their own right, opening a shop with their name proudly displayed above the door. Further along, you hear a low rhythmic pounding, from one of the few workshops still active at this hour. A blacksmith works by lamplight, his silhouette moving with practiced economy. The forge glows red and sparks leap as his hammer falls on the glowing metal. The sound carries into the night like a heartbeat, steady and purposeful. For him, perhaps, there's a commission that must be finished before morning, a horse's shoe for a wealthy trader, or a clasp for a merchant's chest. The city's needs do not sleep, and neither do its most dedicated craftsmen. Past the smithy, you emerge into another market square, larger than the one you saw earlier. This is the main market, though now it lies silent, its wooden stalls folded down like sleeping animals. By daylight, this space would be alive with shouting vendors, haggling customers, and the clatter of carts delivering goods. The smell of fresh produce, fish, and meat would mingle with the fragrance of baked bread and the sharper tang of tanned hides. But now the market rests, and so does the city, cradling its energies for another day's commerce. You pause here, feeling the open sky above you. The city is a maze, but in moments like this, when you stand in a square surrounded by sleeping buildings, it feels less like a trap and more like a living, breathing organism, one that draws in the daylight's bustle and exhales the calm of the night. Somewhere in the quiet, a lone bell marks the passing of another hour. You let the sound fade into the stillness before you move on again, your footsteps soft against the worn stones. From the quiet expanse of the market square, you take one of the narrower streets that slips away like a forgotten stream curling between uneven rows of houses. The stones under your feet are worn smooth, the path subtly slanted so rainwater runs toward the gutters. In the dim moonlight, the pale mortar of the walls glows faintly, and your eyes catch the occasional flicker of movement. A cat darting along a rooftop, a bat dipping low to snatch an insect in the air. As you go, you notice the change in sound. Here, away from the bigger squares and main thoroughfares, the city's voice is softer. You hear the creak of a shutter shifting in the breeze, the faint rustle of straw underfoot. As you step over it, the far-off bark of a dog answering another somewhere beyond the walls. Every so often, there's the muffled thump of a door closing. Behind someone arriving home late, the quick shuffle of boots on stone before silence settles again. The houses here are humbler, their walls patched with mismatched timber, their roofs thatched rather than tiled. Small gardens, barely larger than a rug, sit behind some doors planted with hardy herbs like sage, thyme, and rue. In warmer months, these would be lush with kitchen greens. Now they're trimmed low, preparing for the colder weeks ahead. You imagine the women of these houses bending over the little plots in daylight, cutting bunches of herbs to dry for winter soups and medicinal teas. In one dimly lit doorway, a cooper works late fitting the last iron hoop to a barrel. He hums to himself a low, wordless tune, pausing only to test the seal with a practiced touch. The scent of worked oak mingles with the sharper tang of metal. His hands are rough and stained, the kind of hands you find all over this city, shaped by years of labor. You pass a communal bake oven, a stout domed structure of brick and clay, its mouth covered by a thick wooden door. By day, this place is a hive of activity, with neighbors bringing their dough to be baked in the great oven's lingering heat. Bread baked this way is cheaper and more consistent than tending a private hearth, and it frees up precious firewood for other uses. Tonight, though, the oven sleeps, its last embers hidden under a drift of ash, waiting for the next morning's fire. The lane bends again, and ahead you see a faint glow spilling onto the stones. As you draw closer, the smell reaches you first, honey warm and thick in the air with a faint bite of yeast. A mead cellar is still open her stall, a simple wooden counter under a makeshift canopy. She pours the golden drink into earthen mugs for two men in wool cloaks, their heads bent together in quiet conversation. Mead is not an everyday drink for most. Here it's a little more costly a treat for special evenings or important meetings. You wonder what these two are planning, their voices low and their expressions intent. You nod politely as you pass, and the mead seller offers a brief smile before returning to her work. A single candle flickers beside her on the counter, throwing small shadows that dance against the cloth walls of her stall. Beyond this point, the street descends toward a low-lying area of the city. The air grows damper, the smell of stagnant water mixing with the faint reek of tanneries somewhere nearby. You hear a sluggish trickle from a covered drain, and step carefully. The stones here are slick, and the footing is treacherous if you're not watching. At the bottom of the slope, you come to the tanner's quarter. Even in the muted dark, the smell is unmistakable, a strong, sour mix of animal hides, lime, and the odd tang of the dyes used to treat leather. Long strips of cured hide hang from wooden frames outside the workshops, swaying gently in the breeze. By day, the workers here soak the skins in vats, scrape them clean, and treat them with mixtures passed down through generations. The process is foul-smelling, laborious, and vital. Without it, the city would have no leather for boots, belts, pouches, or saddles. Few linger here after dark, and the streets have a hushed, almost abandoned air. Somewhere in the distance, a dog paws at a refuse heap, the soft clatter of bones on stone echoing faintly. You walk on the air, slowly clearing as you leave the tanners behind. The road curves toward another part of the city wall, where a narrow postern gate sits locked for the night. Through its bars, you glimpse a sliver of moonlit field beyond a reminder that for all its bustle, the city is still an island in a sea of countryside. Farmers and herders live out there, bringing their goods to market at dawn. By the time they arrive, the city will be stretching awake again, its gates swinging wide to swallow the new day's trade. Turning away from the wall, you climb back toward the higher ground, following the glow of a few scattered torches. This quarter feels older, the buildings leaning at odd angles, the street plan winding without apparent logic. You pass under a low archway, the ceiling so close you duck instinctively, and emerge into a cramped courtyard surrounded on all sides by tall houses. In the courtyard's center is a well, its stone lip worn smooth by countless ropes and buckets. Even at night, the well is not deserted. A woman stands here with a lantern drawing water into a wooden pail. She nods to you as she works the bucket, rising hand over hand, the rope groaning softly against the pulley. Wells like this are lifelines, their water feeding not just the households nearby, but the small animals kept in backyard pens, hens, a pig or two, maybe a goat. You leave the courtyard through another narrow passage, emerging onto a broader lane that slopes down toward a cluster of buildings, glowing with steady lamplight. The closer you get, the more the air changes, warmer spiced, carrying a faint sweetness. This is the Baker's Guild Hall, and tonight it's alive with sound. Through the tall windows, you glimpse long tables set for a feast. Men and women in clean tunics and aprons are gathered here for what must be a guild celebration, perhaps a saint's day or the appointment of a new master baker. Laughter rolls out into the night as someone strikes up a song, the melody tumbling into the street in uneven bursts. Guilds hold the city together as much as its walls and markets. Each protects its members, regulates its trade, and upholds its standards. They also provide a social life, a shared identity, and a safety net for their own. A guild feast like this is as much about loyalty and unity as it is about celebration. Tomorrow, these same bakers will be back at their ovens, but tonight they raise their mugs to the work they share. You slip past without lingering, the sound of singing fading behind you. The lane curves again, and you find yourself climbing toward one of the city's oldest quarters, where the streets are steep and cobbled, the houses tall and narrow. Here the air feels stiller, as if the stones themselves hold their breath. A faint smell of incense drifts on the breeze, leading you toward a small chapel tucked between two houses. Its wooden door is ajar, and inside a single candle burns before the altar. The flame dances in the draught, casting long shadows over the painted saints that watch from the walls. You stand there for a moment in the doorway, letting the quiet sink in. Outside, the city moves and murmurs, but here time seems suspended. You know you could sink into the stillness, but the night still has more to show you. You step back into the street, the door swinging gently shut behind you, and continue walking into the city's winding heart. The street beyond the chapel twists in a slow curve, the walls on either side leaning inward like old friends in quiet conversation. Overhead, a narrow strip of sky shows only a few faint stars, the rest hidden behind the rising smoke from distant chimneys. Your footsteps echo softly in the tight space, and the sound of your breathing feels louder than you expect. Ahead, you glimpse a faint flicker of movement, a lantern swaying gently in the hand of a night watchman. His pace is unhurried, his eyes flicking into doorways and down side alleys as he walks. You step aside to let him pass, and he gives you a curt nod. The watch is both protector and enforcer, keeping order after curfew and making note of who's out late. Sometimes that presence feels like safety. Other times it's a reminder that freedom in the city is always measured by who's watching. A few streets further, you hear the uneven rhythm of a cobbler's hammer, its strikes ringing out in the quiet. Peering through the half-open shutters of a small workshop, you see the craftsman bent over his bench, lamplight pooling across scraps of leather. He works slowly, threading a thick needle through a boot's heavy sole, his hands steady from years of practice. This boot might belong to a wealthy merchant or a farm laborer. Either way, it will be made to last. In a world where possessions are few and costly repair is as valuable a skill as creation. Turning down a side lane, you come upon the scent of wood smoke mixed with something faintly metallic. The glow of a forge spills from an open doorway where a young apprentice tends to the fire while his master works at the anvil. Sparks jump into the air, with every strike scattering like tiny, short-lived stars. The hammer's rhythm fills the narrow lane steady and sure, and for a moment you find yourself swaying to it, as if it were a kind of heartbeat for this corner of the city. The lane ends at a small square lit by two torches planted in iron brackets. Their flames sway in the light breeze, sending shadows sliding over the faces of the buildings. In the center of the square stands a stone pillar, its top carved with a weathered crest. Around it, a low stone bench offers a place to sit and talk. By day, this might be where elders of the neighborhood gather to share news. By night, it's a quiet place for a solitary passerby to rest and watch the street. You don't sit, but you pause long enough to hear the faint sounds that drift in from the edges of the city. The soft hoot of an owl, the distant clatter of a cart, arriving late through one of the gates. The air here is cooler, touched with the scent of damp earth carried over the walls from the countryside beyond. You can almost imagine the fields lying dark and still under the moonlight, waiting for the morning's first plow. Continuing on, you find yourself in a neighborhood of narrow houses, pressed shoulder to shoulder, their fronts leaning so close to the street that the gutters nearly touch. The wood here is weathered, the plaster patched in uneven layers. Doors are low and plain, sometimes covered with a scrap of cloth to keep out the draft. Through the thin walls you hear muffled voices, the creak of beds, a child's brief cry soothed into silence. Life here is cramped, but it is shared in hardship and in comfort alike. You pass a small, unlit shop with a sign showing a painted mortar and pestle. The apothecary has long since closed for the night, but you can imagine the shelves inside lined with jars of herbs, dried flowers hanging from the rafters, bundles of roots tied with string. Remedies here are a blend of careful observation and inherited superstition: chamomile for calming the stomach, sage for cleansing the air, garlic hung in doorways to ward off sickness. In a city where disease moves like a shadow, these small rituals matter as much as any formal treatment. A sudden whiff of roasting meat draws you onward toward a low-roofed tavern tucked into a corner. Inside, a handful of late stayers lean on the bar or hunch over tables, speaking in voices softened by drink. A pot hangs over the fire, its contents bubbling slowly. This is the sort of place where a laborer might trade his last coin for a hot meal and an hour's companionship before heading home to a cold room. The tavern keeper glances your way, then returns to filling a mug with dark ale. Beyond the tavern, the street curves again and narrows into a covered passageway between two larger buildings. The air inside is cooler, the stone floor smoothed by centuries of footsteps. You emerge into a space unlike any you've yet seen tonight, a cloistered courtyard surrounded by high stone walls. A small fountain bubbles at its center, its sound gentle but constant, like a whisper you can't quite make out. The water is clear enough to catch the moon's reflection, rippling softly with each drop that falls. On one side of the courtyard stands a low building with heavy wooden doors, perhaps the entrance to a monastery or a guild house. In the stillness, you can almost hear the murmur of voices in prayer or the shuffle of sandaled feet on stone floors. The city may feel sprawling and chaotic from the streets, but within spaces like these, life is ordered, measured, and deliberately slow. You move on, leaving the courtyard for a lane that leads toward the river again. The faint sound of lapping water grows louder as you descend, mingling with the creak of rope against wood from the moored boats. Here, the streets widen slightly to accommodate carts, and you spot a row of warehouses with heavy shutters drawn tight. By day, these doors will swing wide to reveal piles of grain sacks, bales of wool, barrels of salted fish, the city's lifeblood in stored form. Closer to the water's edge, a lone fisherman sits mending his nets by lantern light. His fingers work quickly despite the cold, weaving strands together in a practiced rhythm. He glances up briefly as you pass, then bends over his task again. Fishing may not feed the whole city, but for those who live by it, the river is as constant as the sunrise, its bounty unpredictable but always worth the effort. Following the riverbank, you pass under a stone bridge whose arches rise high enough for small boats to slip beneath. Moss clings to the stones, and the air beneath is damp and cool. On the far side, you climb a short slope and find yourself on a street lined with small workshops, their doors open to the night air. In one, a carpenter is still at work, planning a board by the light of a single candle. In another, a wheelwright sits on a stool, turning the rim of a cartwheel slowly in his hands, checking it for cracks. The farther you walk, the quieter it becomes. The river turns away, the workshops thin out, and the houses grow smaller and sparser. You've reached the edge of the city's inhabited core, where streets begin to blur into garden plots and storage sheds. Somewhere nearby, a rooster crows, prematurely tricked by the torchlight into thinking dawn is near. You pause here, feeling the cool air brush against your skin, carrying scents from both the city and the countryside beyond. Behind you lies the tangled heart of the medieval city, alive even in its sleep. Ahead lies the open land, the promise of space and silence, but the gates are shut, and for now your world is bounded by the stones and shadows of the streets you've come to know. You turn back from the city's edge, letting your feet choose the way. The path you take is quieter now, hugging the inside of the walls where the night seems thicker. The stones here are older, pitted and streaked with moss where rainwater trickles down. Your hand brushes the rough surface as you walk, feeling the chill of centuries stored in the stone. Somewhere high above on the wall's parapet, you hear the faint scrape of boots, a watchman pacing his post. Soon the path bends into a part of the city where the buildings seem to hunch low against the wall, their roofs sloping steeply away from the weather. These are workshops and storehouses, many of them shuttered tight for the night. But one stands open, its doorway spilling lamplight onto the cobbles. Inside, a cooper is stacking barrels, their rounded shapes lined up in perfect rows. He moves methodically, pausing to adjust a hoop here to tap a lid snug there. The smell of fresh-cut oak mingles with the faint tang of pitch used to seal the staves. Past the cooper's shop, you find yourself in a lane strung with faint swaying light from oil lamps set in small iron cages. They cast quivering halos that dance over the walls, catching on the grain of the timber and the uneven plaster. Your shadow stretches and collapses with each step, keeping pace in restless imitation. Above you, a shutter creaks open and then slams shut again. Maybe someone checking the street. Maybe just a gust of wind deciding to meddle. You wander into a district given over to stonemasons. By day, this place would ring with the sound of mallets on chisels, the gritty rasp of stone being shaped for building or decoration. Blocks of limestone lie stacked by the walls, pale shapes in the dim light. Some are rough-hewn fresh from the quarry. Others are half-finished carvings, a curling vine, the suggestion of a saint's face. Even in their stillness, they seem to hold the motion of the mason's hand frozen mid-gesture. Your path takes you into a narrow passage with a low lintel. You duck beneath it and emerge into a tiny courtyard that feels secret, almost hidden from the rest of the city. At its center stands a small lime tree, its leaves stirring faintly in the night air. The courtyard is ringed with doors, each leading to modest dwellings. Laundry hangs limp on a line strung across one wall, the garments pale in the moonlight. Somewhere above, a baby begins to fuss, and a woman's voice hums softly, a lullaby without words. You pause to listen, not to intrude, but to let the gentle sound wash over you. In a city that can be loud and unruly by day, these fragile moments of calm are treasures. The song fades, replaced by the faint rustle of straw in a nearby stable. Peeking in, you see the dark shapes of a few small horses and a mule, their ears flicking at the intrusion. A faint warmth rises from the animals, carrying with it the scent of hay and leather. Leaving the courtyard, you follow a lane that slopes gently upward, and soon the air changes. It's fresher, tinged with the scent of herbs and growing things. You've reached one of the city's gardens, not the sweeping private plots of the wealthy, but the communal gardens tended by monks and townsfolk alike. In neat rows, hardy vegetables push their leaves toward the night sky, and beyond them you glimpse clusters of herbs, lavender, rosemary, sage. In warmer months, bees would buzz here from dawn till dusk. Now the garden is still the plants beaded with dew that catches the lantern light in quiet sparks. At the garden's far end stands a small cloister attached to a modest priory. Its arches frame a square of trimmed grass, and in the center a stone basin catches rainwater. The cloister is empty, but the air holds a lingering sense of order, as if the footsteps of monks still pace invisibly along its covered walkways. Somewhere beyond, you hear a low, steady chanting, night prayers perhaps, or the recitation of psalms before sleep. The lane curves again, leading you back into a more crowded district. Here the houses stand taller, their upper stories jutting out so far they nearly meet above your head. Wooden beams crisscross the plaster walls, and small leaded windows glint faintly in the torchlight. These houses belong to merchants and successful artisans, their prosperity shown in the size of their buildings and the sturdiness of their construction. At the end of the street, you find yourself in front of a tavern unlike the small alehouses you've passed before. This one is larger, with a wide doorway open to the street and the steady hum of many voices inside. Lanterns hang from the beams above the entrance, their light spilling onto the cobbles in golden pools. Within, long tables stretch the length of the hall, crowded with townsfolk, sharing pitchers of ale and plates of bread, cheese, and cured meats. The air is thick with smoke and laughter, the kind of sound that makes even strangers feel like they belong for a while. A lute player in the corner strums a gentle tune, weaving his music between bursts of conversation. Serving women in plain dresses move deftly among the tables, balancing trays laden with mugs and platters. You catch a whiff of roasted lamb as one passes by, the scent rich enough to make your stomach tighten. A merchant near the door is telling a story with exaggerated gestures, his companions roaring at the punchlines. Deals are struck here as easily as friendships, and more than one marriage has begun in a place like this. You don't linger too long, the night is still unfolding, and the city has more to show you. Back outside, you follow the sound of distant drumming. It leads you to a small square where a group of young people are gathered around a fire pit, the flames leaping high in the cool air. Someone beats a hand drum in a slow, hypnotic rhythm, while others clap along. This isn't a formal gathering, just neighbors and friends enjoying the stillness of night together. In a world without the glow of street lamps and screens, a fire in the dark is both entertainment and companionship. Moving on, you find yourself drawn toward the faint metallic clang of a distant bell. It grows louder as you approach until you round a corner and see the source, a night watch changing shifts at one of the smaller guard towers. The outgoing watchmen stamp their feet to keep warm, their breath clouding in the cold air. A few exchange quiet words before heading off toward their beds, while the new watch takes up position on the parapet. The bell's echo lingers even after the sound has faded, bouncing through the narrow streets, like a reminder that time is passing, even here where the hours seem so still. Past the tower, you discover another of the city's water sources, a broad stone cistern open to the air, filled by channels that run from the hills outside the walls. The water's surface trembles faintly under the moonlight, and a bucket sits on the rim, ready for whoever needs it next. You dip your fingers in and feel the cold strike through your skin, grounding you in the present moment. In a place where water is as much a communal responsibility as a necessity, such cisterns are guarded with care. From here, the street rises once more, carrying you toward the faint silhouette of the cathedral spire in the distance. You can't yet see the building itself, but its presence is felt in the air, a kind of pull, as though the heart of the city beats strongest there. The road narrows again, the buildings closing in their shadows, deepening as you step further into the labyrinth. Somewhere behind you, the watchman's bell tolls once, and the sound seems to fold the night around you like a heavy cloak. The street begins to slope downward again, the stones under your boots slick in places where a thin sheen of moisture glistens under the moonlight. You steady yourself with a hand against the rough wall of a house, feeling the grain of the timber frame beneath your fingers. Somewhere close by, a shutter slams once sharply, and then silence returns as quickly as it came. You follow the curve of the lane until it opens into a small square, lit by 2 torches fixed into the wall of a guild hall. The wooden doors are shut for the night, but their carvings are clearly visible even in the dim light, tools crossed in a formal emblem, the proud mark of the Weavers' Guild. Above the doors, a narrow window glows faintly. Someone is still awake inside, perhaps a senior member reviewing accounts by candlelight, or an apprentice tasked with watching over the guild's most valuable stores of cloth. Beside the guild hall, a narrow alley runs off at an angle too tempting to ignore. You slip into its shadows and find yourself in an older part of the city where the houses lean at such angles that they almost seem to be whispering to one another overhead. Here the walls are patched with centuries of repairs, mismatched stones, timbers from different eras, and the street is so narrow that you could almost stretch your arms and touch both sides. A faint scent of dye reaches you, and soon you pass a workshop where lengths of colored cloth hang in the open air. The fabric shifts slightly in the night breeze, casting shifting shadows across the ground. Even in the moonlight, you can see the richness of the colors, deep blues, bold reds, the kind of shades that speak of expensive imports and long hours of labor. In daylight, this street would be alive with dyers, washers, and fullers, their work staining the cobblestones and their hands alike. But tonight, the only sound is the gentle flutter of cloth in the wind. The alley bends sharply and delivers you into a small courtyard, half hidden behind taller buildings. Here the air feels stiller, sheltered from the night wind. A few wooden carts are parked along the wall, their wheels blocked with stones. One holds baskets of wool waiting to be carted. Another is stacked with firewood for the coming days. A lantern burns low on a post near the entrance, its weak light casting long shadows that stretch into the far corners. From here, you wander down another winding lane until you reach a bridge that spans a narrow channel, one of the city's hidden waterways diverted long ago to feed fountains, cisterns, and even the tanner's vats. The water moves sluggishly in the dark, catching only the smallest glimmers of moonlight. Somewhere nearby, a frog croaks, startling you with its suddenness. The bridge itself is little more than a few sturdy planks laid across stone supports worn smooth by the tread of countless feet. Crossing over, you find yourself in a district where the houses have wider frontages, their ground floors given over entirely to workshops. Through one open doorway, you see a woodcarver's shop, its benches littered with curls of pale shavings. Unfinished pieces rest on the tables, the arm of a chair, a carved panel for a door, the delicate figure of a saint with its features still forming beneath the craftsman's knife. The scent of fresh-cut wood drifts out into the street, sweet and grounding. You pause to listen. Somewhere down the lane, a faint tapping echoes, not the ringing strike of a blacksmith's hammer, but the lighter, more deliberate sound of a goldsmith at work. Following it, you come to a small, well-kept building with shuttered windows. Inside, at a narrow bench, a man bends over a tiny shape cradled in his hands. A single candle burns beside him, throwing light onto the fine tools laid out in careful order. Gold glints briefly in the flicker, a ring being shaped, perhaps, or a clasp for a merchant's cloak. In this city, beauty is often born in the smallest of spaces. You move on, the goldsmith's careful rhythm fading behind you, replaced by the faint murmur of running water once more. The lane widens slightly and leads you toward the riverfront again. Here the air is damp and cool, and you hear the hollow slap of water against wooden pilings. Boats lie moored along the quay, their ropes groaning softly with the pull of the current. On the far side of the quay, a fishmonger's stall stands, ready for the morning's catch. The wooden table is scrubbed clean, but the faint smell of salt and scales lingers in the air. By dawn, this place will be alive with shouts, knives flashing, as fish are gutted and cleaned barrels of salted herring rolled into place for sale. For now, only the river keeps vigil flowing past, with the patience of centuries. You follow the quay until you reach a low stone archway that leads back into the maze of streets. Passing through it, you enter a lane lined with tall houses whose ground floors are given over to storage. Stacked barrels, sacks, and crates sit against the walls, their contents hidden, but hinted at in the smells that drift from them, the warm spice of cinnamon, the sharper note of dried fish, the faint sweetness of apples kept cool in straw. These goods are the veins of the city, feeding its markets and kitchens day after day. Turning another corner, you find yourself climbing a short hill toward a faint glow ahead. At the top stands a small square dominated by a tall column, its base carved with curling vines and lions. A torch burns beside it, casting shadows that ripple across the carvings. The column commemorates some long-ago event, a battle won, a siege endured, though the details are lost on you. What matters is that here in the heart of the night, it stands as a reminder that the city has survived much and will endure much more. From the square, a set of worn stone steps descends toward another quarter of the city. You take them slowly, your hand brushing the wall for balance. At the bottom, the street is narrower, and the house is older still. The timbers here are darkened with age, the plaster cracked and patched in many places. Yet in the upper windows, you see the warm flicker of candles, the silhouettes of people moving quietly in their rooms. Life in all its forms continues here just as it does in the grander parts of town. You pass a small bakery, its oven still faintly warm from the day's work. A few loaves rest on a rack inside, perhaps set aside for the baker's own family. The smell of baked bread lingers in the doorway, a comfort in the chill air. Further on, you glimpse a cobbler's bench through a half-open shutter, the tools laid out neatly as if waiting for tomorrow's labor. These quiet glimpses of work, paused, but not finished, tell you more about the city than its grandest buildings ever could. Ahead, you hear the faint murmur of voices. A group of men stand in a loose circle at the mouth of an alley, speaking in low tones. They glance your way briefly, then turn back to their conversation. You don't linger in the medieval city. Not every gathering is one you want to interrupt. Instead, you slip into a side street, letting their voices fade into the background hum of the sleeping city. The night deepens, and with it comes a stillness that feels both heavy and protective. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolls, once marking the hour. The sound rolls over the rooftops and through the streets, as much a part of the city's heartbeat as the rush of the river or the hammer of the blacksmith. You keep walking, guided now more by instinct than direction, letting the streets carry you deeper into their winding embrace. The alley you've chosen narrows again until it feels more like a corridor than a street. The walls lean close, their upper stories jutting far overhead, and between them the night sky is little more than a ribbon of deep indigo. Your footsteps sound different here, muffled, as if the air itself absorbs them. Somewhere behind a shuttered window, a dog gives a short, questioning bark, then quiets again. The stones beneath your boots are slick, not with rain, but with the thin film of damp that creeps in from the nearby river. You catch the faint scent of fish and wet wood. Before long, the alley spits you out into a wider lane, where the smell grows stronger, mingled with smoke from small cooking fires still burning inside homes. A faint orange glow flickers here and there behind warped shutters. You pass a modest house where a man leans on the sill of an open window, looking out into the dark, as though waiting for someone. His eyes follow you briefly, but he says nothing. In a city like this, curiosity and caution often walk hand in hand. You keep moving. The lane soon slopes downward toward a stretch of riverfront you haven't walked before. It's quieter here than the busy quayside you saw earlier. The boats are smaller fishing skiffs, narrow cargo craft pulled up against the stone embankment. Ropes creak softly in their moorings, and a pair of ducks glide lazily in the shallows, barely disturbing the surface. A small wooden footbridge crosses a narrow inlet here. Its planks creak under your weight as you step onto it. You pause halfway across, leaning on the simple rail to look down. The water moves sluggishly, reflecting a patchwork of light from the moon and the few lanterns still burning along the riverbank. Somewhere upriver, a mill wheel turns slowly, its paddles dipping into the current with a steady groan. On the far side of the bridge, you find yourself in a district where the streets open into irregular courtyards, each one its own little world. In the first courtyard, a cart stands half-loaded with sacks of grain abandoned until morning. In another, a low shed smells faintly of hops, perhaps used for storing ingredients for brewing. The air here feels damp but not unpleasant, carrying with it the earthy promise of trade to come. You move on until you come across a tavern unlike the ones you've passed before. It's smaller, humbler, a place where fishermen might gather after selling their catch. Through the doorway, you see only a few tables occupied, the men hunched over their mugs and speaking in short bursts between long silences. A single candle burns at each table, its flame barely holding its own against the draft from the door. The smell of salted fish hangs faintly in the air. You linger only a moment before slipping past. The street curves again, leading you away from the river toward an area where the houses seem more tightly packed. Here the air grows warmer, the faint scent of wool and soap drifting from somewhere ahead. You soon find the source, a row of fuller's workshops. During the day, these places would be alive with activity workers stomping cloth in troughs of water and fuller's earth to clean and thicken the fabric. Now the tubs sit still, the water within them catching a pale shimmer from the lanterns. The silence is so complete you can almost hear the cloth drying slowly on the racks inside. A side passage leads you between two of these workshops and into a narrow back lane. The ground here is rougher, more rutted, and you can smell damp earth mixed with the faint, almost sour tang of wet wool. Ahead, the lane widens unexpectedly into a small square where a solitary tree grows its leaves, whispering in the faintest breeze. A stone bench curves around its trunk, worn smooth by generations of passers-by resting their legs. You sit for a moment, feeling the coolness of the stone through your clothes. The quiet here feels deeper, as if even the city's restless hum pauses to listen. After a while, you rise and follow a lane that climbs steadily uphill. The houses here grow a little grander, with each turn their windows larger, their shutters freshly painted. At one doorway, an iron lantern glows warmly beside the carved wooden lintel. A brass knocker shaped like a lion's head gleams in the low light. You can imagine the merchant or city official who might live here, their wealth keeping them close to the city's heart, but high enough above the river to escape its dampness. The road brings you into a small square where a fountain trickles quietly in the center. Its basin is carved with curling leaves and fruit, the work of a patient stonemason. Around it, the paving stones are smoother than elsewhere, worn by years of feet passing on their way to and from the nearby church. The church's doorway is closed now, but you can see the faint outline of painted saints on the panels, faded by weather and time. From here, a flight of shallow steps leads to a terrace overlooking part of the city. Lanterns glimmer in the streets below like scattered embers, and beyond them the river gleams faintly under the moon. The walls stand dark against the sky, their silhouettes broken only by the squared shapes of the watchtowers. You rest your hands on the cool stone of the terrace wall, feeling the grain of centuries under your palms. The terrace path curves along the side of the hill, leading you toward an older quarter where the buildings stand closer to the cathedral. The streets here feel quieter, almost reverent. In one, a row of houses is set with small niches holding painted icons, each one lit by a single candle. The flames sway in the night air, sending their shadows dancing over the worn images. Passers-by pause here even at this hour, making a quick sign of the cross before continuing on. As you near the cathedral square, the building itself begins to loom above the rooftops. Its spire reaches into the night sky like a finger pointing to the heavens. The closer you come, the more its details emerge from the shadows, the tracery of stone along the windows, the carved saints gazing down from their niches, the heavy wooden doors bound in iron. The square is empty at this hour, the market stalls folded and packed away. The sound of your footsteps carries farther here, bouncing lightly off the stone. In the hush, you notice the faint scent of incense lingering from earlier services, clinging to the air like the memory of a song. You walk slowly across the square, letting the cathedral's presence wrap around you. Even in darkness, it dominates, a reminder that in this city, faith is as solid and inescapable as the walls themselves. At the far side of the square, a narrow passage slips between the cathedral and an adjoining building. You follow it, your steps echoing against the stone until it opens onto a quiet cloister. The grass in the central garth is silvered with dew, and the covered walkways are lined with wooden benches. Somewhere in the shadows, a small fountain trickles steadily, its sound mingling with the faint rustle of leaves, stirred by the night wind. You pause here, letting the stillness soak into you. The air is cooler, and every sound, the fountain, the wind, the creak of timber, feels magnified. You could stay for hours, but the streets still call. Beyond the cloister gate, the city waits with more turns, more voices, and more quiet corners than you can yet imagine. You step out from the cloister into a street that hugs the cathedral's shadow. The walls here seem impossibly tall, their surfaces catching only the faintest traces of moonlight. Your footsteps sound small in the hush, muffled by the sheer weight of the stone around you. Somewhere high above, a pigeon coos, once its voice echoing faintly against the masonry, before fading back into the stillness. The lane curves slowly passing beneath a high archway that joins the cathedral to a neighboring building. Under it, the air is cooler, the sound of your steps compressed into a narrow, whispering rhythm. On the other side, the street opens, slightly revealing a cluster of finer houses, the residences of clergy or wealthy patrons, perhaps. Their windows are shuttered tight, but you can picture the heavy furnishings within carved oak tables, rich tapestries, and the faint glimmer of silver in the candlelight. A narrow alley splits away here, leading toward the sound of trickling water. You follow it and soon find yourself at a small public fountain tucked against the wall of a tall house. Its basin is fed by a carved stone lion's head, the water spilling into the trough with a constant, gentle splash. In the moonlight, you can see coins lying at the bottom, tokens tossed in with whispered wishes, though the city's folk would never call it superstition aloud. Near the fountain, a stone bench runs along the wall. An old man sits there, wrapped in a heavy cloak, his head bent low. He glances up briefly as you pass, his face weathered, his eyes catching a glint of light from your lantern. Without a word, he turns back toward the water, as if content to keep whatever thoughts have drawn him here. Leaving him to his vigil, you continue along the lane until the faint scent of smoke reaches you. Ahead, a brazier burns outside a small guard post, the coals glowing deep orange. Two watchmen stand nearby, their spears resting against the wall, their breath rising in quick puffs into the cool night. One adjusts his cloak against the breeze. The other gives you a brief assessing glance before returning to his quiet conversation. The city is never truly unobserved, even at this hour. The lane dips again toward the river. Here you find a low bridge of stone arches spanning a narrow channel. Its surface is worn smooth by countless carts and feet, the mortar between the stones crumbling in places. On the far side, the road widens into a working quay, where a few laborers linger unloading the last of a late-arriving barge. The soft thud of sacks landing on the cobbles punctuates the low murmur of their voices. Beyond the quay, the streets twist into a quarter, where the buildings seem older, their fronts warped, and leaning their lower timbers dark with age and damp. The alleys here are tight and irregular, twisting on themselves until you lose any sense of direction. In one narrow court, you pass a tinker's cart laden with pots and pans, their dull metal shapes glinting faintly in the dim light. He's left it for the night, perhaps trusting that in this tightly knit neighborhood no one will touch what isn't theirs. From somewhere nearby comes the faint scrape of metal on stone. You follow the sound to a workshop where a knife grinder works under the light of a single lantern. The wheel spins slowly, sparks flying each time the blade meets the stone. His foot pumps the treadle in a steady rhythm, and now and then he pauses to check the edge of the blade with a practiced thumb. In this city, a sharp knife is as much a tool of survival as a luxury. Continuing on, you find yourself at the edge of a small square bordered by modest homes. In the center, a low stone wall encloses a shallow pool fed by one of the city's many diverted channels. The water is dark and still, except where a single trickle enters from a spout at one corner. A lone goose drifts across the surface, muttering softly to itself. You wonder how it came to be here, in the heart of the city, floating in a pool built for human needs. From the square, a lane winds upward toward another district. The slope is lined with steps in places where the hill grows too steep for a smooth path. You take them slowly, passing houses whose doors open directly onto the stairway. Some are propped ajar to let in the cool night air, offering glimpses of narrow rooms lit by the soft glow of a hearth. The smell of wood smoke follows you upward, mingled with the faint sweetness of apples stewing somewhere inside. At the crest, you emerge into a wide street that feels more deliberate than most you've walked tonight. The paving stones are larger, more evenly set. The buildings here stand straighter, their facades more uniform. This is a merchant's road, one of the arteries along which the city's trade flows daily. Though the shops are closed, their painted signs hang proudly above the shutters. A sheaf of wheat for a baker, a gilded boot for a cobbler, a painted comb for a hairdresser. You pass a shop whose front window, glazed in small leaded panes, holds an array of goods, lengths of ribbon, small carved toys, and a cluster of earthen pots. Even at night, the display is meant to tempt to remind passers-by that here is a place to spend their coin. Further along, a spice seller's stall stands shuttered, but the faint scent of cinnamon and cloves still lingers in the air. The street leads toward a small plaza where a single torch burns beside a public notice board. Sheets of parchment nailed in untidy rows flutter in the night breeze. Some carry neat lines of official script proclamations from the city council, notices of upcoming markets, while others are written in rougher hand offers of work goods for sale, missing items sought by their owners. Even in the stillness, the board hums with the sense of daily life, a conversation carried on in ink and parchment. You pause here, feeling the weight of the city around you. Behind every door and shutter, someone is sleeping, someone is working late, someone is watching the street. The medieval city never truly stops. It only changes its rhythm. And as you stand in the quiet, you realize you've learned to walk to that rhythm, without thinking, matching your steps to its steady, ancient beat. A faint chime drifts through the air, not the deep toll of the cathedral bell, but a lighter, more playful note. You follow it until you reach a small workshop tucked under a sloping roof. Inside, by the light of a single oil lamp, a toy maker works at his bench. His hands shape a small wooden horse, the curl of each shaving, dropping to the floor with a soft hiss. On the shelves behind him, rows of painted figures, knights, kings, animals stand waiting for small hands to bring them to life. The scent of pine shavings and beeswax fills the air, a comfort so warm it almost makes you linger. But the night pulls you onward. You leave the toy maker's glow behind, following a narrow lane that dips once more toward the river, where the sound of water is joined by the creak of mooring ropes and the faint call of someone across the dark expanse. Somewhere out there, beyond the walls, other towns and cities lie under their own moons, each with its own tangled streets and secret corners. For now, though, your world is here inside these walls, within these streets, walking in step with the heartbeat of the medieval night. The lane beside the river bends, narrowing until you can reach out and brush the damp stone wall with your fingertips. The smell of water grows stronger here, tinged with a faint metallic note from the iron hoops of moored barges. Lantern light wobbles on the rippled surface, breaking into shivers with each small current. Somewhere in the dark, an oar dips into the river, sending out a soft splash that fades almost instantly. You pass a small boathouse with its doors ajar. Inside, a skiff rests on wooden trestles, its hull half-tarred and smelling of pitch. A pair of oars lean against the wall, their handles worn smooth from years of use. The air inside is warmer, close with the scents of rope tar and river mud, the working perfume of those who live their lives by the water's edge. Beyond the boathouse, the lane tilts upward toward a district where the buildings grow taller again, their upper floors jutting over the street until they nearly touch. The air here is thicker, carrying the mingled smells of cooking smoke, drying laundry, and the faint sharpness of tanned leather. A faint hum of voices drifts from somewhere ahead, not loud but constant, like the low murmur of a stream. It draws you to a courtyard ringed with narrow-fronted houses. Many have their doors propped open, despite the hour their thresholds spilling warm light into the dark. In one doorway, a woman sits mending a shirt, her needle flashing briefly in the lamplight. She glances up, offers you a small nod, then returns to her work. From another doorway comes the faint sound of a cradle creaking its rhythm slow and steady as a lullaby. You linger for a moment, feeling the weight of this little pocket of life. In a city where so many places are guarded, locked, or shuttered at night, this courtyard breathes openly. Neighbors move freely between doorways, exchanging a word or a smile, their familiarity stronger than any bolt or lock. A narrow passage leads you out of the courtyard into a lane where the cobbles are uneven and patched with rough slabs. Here, a man pushes a handcart loaded with kindling. His steps are slow but steady, the small wheels rattling in a syncopated rhythm against the stones. He doesn't look up as you pass, intent on his route, perhaps bound for an early morning oven or a customer who pays well for dry wood before the rest of the city wakes. The lane spills into a market square you've not seen before. It's smaller than the great market, but clearly a busy place by day. The stalls are packed away, their wooden frames leaning against the walls, but the smell of the day's trade still lingers, bruised apples, wilted herbs, the faint saltiness of fish. A single torch burns at the square's center, planted beside a stone post that bears the city's crest. Its light barely reaches the edges, leaving the surrounding houses in shadow. One of these houses has its shutters open just wide enough for lamplight to spill through. Inside, you glimpse the silhouette of a man bent over a table, quill in hand. The quick, deliberate movements suggest a clerk or merchant recording accounts. Papers lie scattered across the table, their edges catching the glow like pale sails in a dark sea. In this city, work rarely keeps to daylight hours when coin is involved. From the square, a side street carries you upward toward the faint outline of one of the city gates. As you draw closer, you can see the heavy timbers barred across it, the iron fittings dull in the torchlight. A watchman leans in the shelter of the gatehouse arch, his spear propped beside him. His eyes follow you for a moment, not unfriendly, but alert, the gaze of someone who must account for all movement in and out of the city after dark. Near the gate, a long, low building sits with its doors bolted. The faint smell of hay and animals seeps out, and you realize it's a stable. Inside, the shapes of horses shift faintly in the dimness, a few snorting softly in their sleep. Leather tack hangs neatly on pegs along the wall, and the air is warm with the breath of animals and the quiet rustle of straw. From here, you take a road that skirts the inside of the city wall. It's quieter here, the bulk of the buildings pressing close to your left, while the wall's sheer face looms to your right. Occasionally, you pass a narrow slit in the masonry, an arrow loop that once gave archers a view of the ground beyond. In the moonlight, the wall's surface gleams faintly, its stones cold and unyielding. Eventually, the road bends toward the city's heart again. You pass a large building whose upper floor overhangs the street, supported by stout wooden braces. A painted sign sways gently from a chain, a sheaf of parchment and a quill. This must be the station of a city scribe, someone who writes contracts, letters, and petitions for those who cannot read or write themselves. The The shutters are closed now, but you can picture the room inside cluttered with ink pots, wax seals, and stacks of folded documents. The road narrows again, drawing you into a district where the houses press so close that their eaves seem to brush in the middle. Here, the only light comes from a few candles left burning behind oiled parchment windows, their glow soft and golden. Your own shadow stretches long ahead of you, distorted by the uneven cobbles. In a small open space between the houses, a wooden well stands. A bucket rests on the stones beside it, tipped on its side, a few drops still clinging to the rim. The rope leading into the well creaks faintly in the breeze. Somewhere nearby, a cat pads softly across the stone's tail, curling upward before it vanishes into the dark. Beyond the well, the street descends into a part of the city where the air feels cooler and smells faintly of damp earth. You pass a low archway that opens onto a garden enclosed by high walls. Moonlight filters through the bare branches of fruit trees, their shadows tangled across the ground. In one corner, rows of herbs grow in neat rectangles, their leaves silvered with dew. The scent of rosemary drifts faintly on the air, sharp and clean. At the far side of the garden, a door leads into what must be a small priory or residence for clergy. The building is quiet now, but you can imagine it by day, monks or nuns tending the garden, carrying baskets of herbs to the kitchens, speaking in low voices as they pass along the covered walks. The garden feels self-contained, a world within a world kept alive by hands that work in time with the seasons rather than the hours of the clock. You slip out through another arch into a narrow lane that winds back toward the busier heart of the city. The air warms again, carrying with it the faint sense of bread smoke and human closeness. Somewhere ahead, a soft burst of laughter breaks the quiet, quickly swallowed by the night. The city breathes in and out around you, its life folding into yours, as if you've always been here. You follow the lane deeper into the warren of streets, the sounds of the priory garden already fading behind you. The way twists, bending around the jutting corners of houses until you can no longer see more than a few paces ahead at a time. The cobblestones here are uneven, the gaps between them tufted with stubborn weeds that have found their place among the stones. A faint metallic tapping draws your attention. Turning a corner, you find a farrier's workshop, still lit, the forge banked low but glowing faintly in the dark. The farrier stands outside, leaning over a horse's raised hoof, rasping it smooth in measured strokes. The animal breathes steadily, its ear flicking at the sound of your approach. The farrier glances up briefly, offering a nod, before returning to his work, the rasp's song blending with the quiet of the lane. Past the workshop, the air grows warmer and carries the mingled smells of grain and ale. You're approaching a brewer's yard. Even at night, there's a hum of quiet activity here. A pair of men roll heavy barrels across the yard, their rounded sides knocking softly against the cobbles. Somewhere inside, the faint hiss of fermenting mash drifts from a large vat, accompanied by the low murmur of voices. Brewing is constant work, measured not by the clock, but by the needs of the brew itself. The road bends again, widening into a small market square lit by two torches fixed into iron brackets. The shadows they cast dance across the fronts of houses and shops. In the middle of the square, a raised wooden platform stands, empty, a place for public announcements by day, and sometimes for sterner proclamations when the law demands it. Tonight, it is only a stage for the shadows, silent and still. One side of the square holds a small cookshop, its shutters open to reveal the dim light within. The cook leans over a pot suspended above the hearth, stirring slowly. The scent of onions, herbs, and stewing meat escapes into the night, warm and tempting. A few patrons sit at rough benches, eating in silence, save for the occasional scrape of a spoon. This is food for working folk, simple, hearty, filling a meal that tastes best after a long day of labor. Leaving the square, you choose a lane that slopes downward toward the sound of trickling water. Soon you come to a covered channel running between the houses, part of the city's network for carrying fresh water where it's needed. The flow here is gentle, the surface broken now and then by small eddies as it passes under stone bridges, linking opposite sides of the street. You can hear the soft clink of buckets being set down in the dark, a reminder that even at night, the city's water never truly rests. Following the channel, you enter a district of tradesmen's workshops. By day, these streets would be full of noise, hammering, sawing voices, calling orders across the way. Now the tools lie still on benches, their edges dulled in the flicker of the few lanterns still burning. In one open doorway, a tailor sits alone mending a tear in a cloak by lamplight. His needle flashes in quick, precise movements, his lips pressed together in focus. The air smells faintly of wool and the sharp tang of fresh dye. Past the tailor's shop, you hear the creak of a heavy door opening. A man steps out carrying a small crate of apples, their pale skins catching the torchlight. He sets them down on a low stool outside his door, perhaps for the morning's first customer. He glances your way, offers a faint smile, then slips back inside without a word. The lane widens once more into a modest square where a stone cross rises from the center. At its base, someone has placed a small wreath of dried flowers, tied together with a strip of cloth. A candle burns beside it, its flame bending in the light breeze. Whether it marks a recent loss or a long-kept remembrance, you cannot tell, but its presence lends the square a quiet gravity. You linger there for a moment before taking another street that curves between houses, leaning so close their eaves nearly touch. The space between them feels like a tunnel, the moon reduced to a narrow line above. Here, the smell of baking drifts faintly through the air, though the bakeries are shut tight for the night. Somewhere within dough is rising slowly, ready to be baked before dawn. The lane carries you toward the faint sound of distant music, a slow, lilting melody, the kind meant for listening rather than dancing. You follow it until you reach a modest tavern tucked between two taller houses. Through its open door, you see a small group gathered near the hearth, a man playing a fiddle while others sit in quiet appreciation. The music spills softly into the street, twining itself into the night air until it becomes part of the city's own lullaby. Moving on, you find yourself in a street that slopes toward the city walls again. The air cools, carrying the smell of damp stone and moss. You pass a low tower where a watchman leans against the battlement, his spear propped beside him, eyes scanning the streets below. A small brazier glows beside him, sending up thin curls of smoke. His shift will stretch long into the night, and he will keep watch even when the rest of the city is deep in dreams. At the base of the tower, a wooden door stands ajar. Peering in, you glimpse a cramped guard room, a bench, a table with a scattering of dice and a half-finished mug of ale. The air smells faintly of leather sweat and smoke, the scent of men who live half their lives on duty. From here, a short walk brings you to another of the city's gates, smaller than the great main gates, but still sturdy and heavily barred. A torch burns in a sconce by the entrance, its light spilling onto the cobbles in a wide circle. The iron fittings on the gate gleam dully, each bolt and hinge a quiet testament to the blacksmith's craft. You turn back into the city, taking a quieter street that skirts the walls inside. The houses here have small walled gardens, their wooden gates latched for the night. You catch the scent of late-blooming flowers, sharp against the cooler air. Somewhere nearby, a nightbird calls, once its note carrying high and clear above the hush. The street ends at another small square, this one centered on a stone fountain, shaped like a cluster of leaves. The water falls in thin sheets into a wide basin, its sound soothing in the quiet. You sit for a moment on the fountain's edge, feeling the cool stone beneath you, watching the ripples catch the torchlight. The city feels vast and intimate all at once, a labyrinth that somehow makes room for these small islands of calm. When you rise, the path you choose leads you deeper again toward the tangled lanes that always seem to hide one more story, one more life unfolding quietly behind closed doors. The night presses close, gentle but insistent, as if reminding you that there is still more to see before the first light touches the rooftops. The lane you take now threads away from the square like a quiet stream slipping into the shadows. The buildings crowd close, their overhanging upper stories pressing inward until the strip of night sky above feels thin as a ribbon. Somewhere high overhead, you hear the faint creak of a sign swinging on its chain, its metal fittings groaning softly in the breeze. You pass a doorway where the faint smell of beeswax drifts out, perhaps a candle maker's workshop, quiet for now, but redolent with its trade. The scent is warm, almost sweet, clinging faintly to the damp air. You imagine the daylight hours here, blocks of wax softening by the fire wicks being dipped again and again until they grow thick enough to hold their shape. The lane turns, spilling you into a modest court. At its center, a wooden post holds a single lantern, its flame fluttering in the night wind. The flicker throws wavering light onto the surrounding walls, revealing their patchwork of timber plaster and stone. A cat lies curled beneath the lantern, its tail twitching lazily as it keeps half an eye on you. From here, you follow a side passage between two houses, the walls so close your shoulders almost graze them. The ground dips sharply under your feet, leading you toward a part of the city where the smell changes. It's sharper here, edged with the faint tang of vinegar and fermenting fruit. You soon pass the narrow frontage of a vintner's shop. A row of casks rests just inside, each one marked with chalked symbols. Above them hangs a string of dried herbs, a charm against spoilage, as much tradition as belief. The vintner's district is quiet now, but you can imagine it by day, casks rolled into place, wine drawn off into smaller jugs for customers, apprentices mopping up the spills that streak the cobbles. A few shops have narrow benches outside where patrons might sit and drink in the afternoon sun, swapping stories until the shadows grow long. You turn into another lane, this one opening onto a small, covered arcade. Wooden pillars support a roof that shelters the stalls beneath. At the far end, a fishmonger's table stands empty, save for a scattering of scales that glint faintly in the lamplight. The air here holds the ghost of the day's catch, sharp, clean, and a little briny. A few cats slip silently between the stalls, hopeful for scraps that never came. Leaving the arcade, you cross into a quieter stretch of street where the paving stones are smoother underfoot. The houses here seem older, their timbers thick and dark with age, their plaster patched in irregular shapes. Some upper windows are still lit, showing the silhouettes of people moving within, someone carrying a jug, another bending over a table, the slow sway of a curtain in a draft. The road carries you toward a small bridge over one of the city's narrow water channels. The water slips beneath in a soft, steady whisper, catching only fragments of light from the houses that face it. A small boat is moored just downstream, its prow nudging gently against the bank. It looks to be the kind used for short hauls, perhaps carrying grain from the mills or bundles of kindling from upriver. Beyond the bridge, you step into a broad, low-ceilinged passage that runs beneath a row of houses. The air here is still and cool, the sound of your footsteps bouncing softly off the beams overhead. On the other side, the street widens into a lively little quarter, even at this hour. An open-fronted bakehouse glows warmly, its ovens still working through the night. Two men in aprons slide loaves onto wide paddles, their movements quick and precise. The smell is almost overwhelming, rich, yeasty, comforting. A few early customers wait nearby, clutching baskets lined with cloth. They nod to you absently, their eyes fixed on the bread that will soon be theirs. Across from the bakehouse, a lamp-lit shop displays rows of glazed jugs and mugs. The potter himself stands just inside, turning a half-finished piece in his hands, inspecting the smoothness of its curve. The shelves around him are filled with work in various stages, pale, unglazed clay, beside gleaming, finished pieces in earth reds and deep blues. The air smells faintly of damp clay and the wood smoke from the kiln. A little further on, a stairway leads down to a cellar door half hidden in shadow. You hear the faint clink of glass from within, perhaps a tavern tucked below street level. A low murmur of voices drifts out, rising now and then into quiet laughter. Even at this hour, pockets of company still glow in the city's folds. Following the curve of the street, you pass a row of houses whose upper floors are decorated with carved wooden corbels. Each one bears a different shape, a snarling beast, a smiling face, a curling vine. Some are worn nearly smooth, their features softened by centuries of weather. In the moonlight, their shadows stretch down the wall like silent sentries. The lane narrows again, drawing you toward the faint chime of a small bell. It comes from a chapel tucked into the base of a tall house. Its doorway is open, revealing a single candle burning before a painted image of a saint. The air smells faintly of frankincense. You stand at the threshold for a moment, listening to the quiet as the bell's last note fades. When you step away, the street seems even darker for having left that small pool of light. The houses here are plainer, their shutters closed tight. The road descends gently toward what must be another of the city's smaller gates. You can see the pale outline of the wall ahead, the faint torchlight of the gatehouse spilling over the cobbles. Two guards stand just within the arch, speaking quietly. Their voices echo slightly under the stone vault. One shifts his spear to a more comfortable grip. The other rubs his hands briskly against the cold. You pass without comment, turning instead toward a narrow track that hugs the wall inside the city. Here the world feels quieter still. The wall's sheer bulk rises to your right, its surface cool and faintly damp under your fingertips. To your left, small gardens press against the backs of houses. In one, a row of drying racks holds bundles of herbs, sage, rosemary, lavender, their scents drifting faintly on the air. Another garden has a small coop where a handful of hens mutter sleepily in their roosts. The path bends, and ahead you see a small watchtower rising against the night sky. Its doorway is open, spilling light onto the stones. Inside, a brazier glows red, a few spears leaning against the wall beside it. A watchman looks up as you pass, nodding once before returning to his quiet vigil. Beyond the tower, the lane slips back into the dense weave of streets. You let it carry you, not minding where it goes, only that it keeps unfolding. The medieval city has a way of wrapping itself around you at night, not with grandeur, but with small, unhurried details that settle into the mind like dust on a windowsill. And so you keep walking, letting the night decide where it will take you next. The lane you follow slips into an older part of the city, where the air feels cooler and the stones underfoot are worn nearly smooth from centuries of feet. The buildings here lean together at odd angles, the beams warped with age, their plaster cracked and patched over and over until the walls resemble faded quilts. A faint smell of smoke drifts from a nearby chimney, carrying with it the richer scent of roasting chestnuts. Turning a corner, you find the source a small brazier, set up in a doorway, its coals glowing softly in the night. An elderly woman stands beside it, turning the chestnuts slowly with a small wooden paddle. Their shells split open with soft pops releasing bursts of sweet, nutty fragrance into the air. She glances up as you pass, her face lit warmly by the brazier's glow, but says nothing, just offers a small, knowing smile before returning to her task. From here, the street narrows until you can barely walk two abreast. The eaves overhead nearly touch the space between them, filled with laundry lines strung from one building to the next. Bits of cloth sway faintly in the breeze, a child's shirt, a worn apron, a square of fabric dyed a faded red. In the daylight, these streets would be crowded with the chatter of neighbors leaning from windows, but now they are hushed, as if holding their breath. You pass a small alcove carved into the wall, holding a weather-softened figure of a saint. A single candle flickers in front of it, shielded from the wind by a clay pot with one side broken away. Someone has left a sprig of rosemary there, its leaves still fresh. It's a quiet reminder that in this city, faith seeps into the smallest corners, marking even the humblest streets with its touch. The lane spills into a small square where the stones dip toward a central drain. In one corner stands a public bake oven, its dome shape unmistakable even in the dim light. The heavy door is closed now, but you can imagine the place alive by day, neighbors arriving with trays of dough, the oven tender working steadily to slide them in and draw them out. The smell of fresh bread thick in the air. The oven is more than a convenience, it's a meeting place, a point where the daily threads of the community knot together. Leaving the square, you take a street that slopes gently downhill, the sound of moving water growing with each step. Soon you come upon one of the city's smaller mills, its wheel turning slowly in the moonlight. The water slaps against the paddles with a steady rhythm, sending droplets flashing into the air. The mill's windows are dark now, but you can picture the work inside, the grind of stone on grain, the steady shoveling of flour into sacks, the scent of fresh milled wheat. From here, a narrow footpath runs alongside the mill stream. You follow it, the sound of the water close at your stisama. The houses along this stretch are simpler, their wooden shutters unpainted, their walls plain but sturdy. In one window, a faint glow reveals a woman bent over her spinning wheel, her foot working the treadle in a slow, practiced rhythm. The soft whir of the wheel blends with the murmur of the stream, a lullaby only this part of the city hears. The path turns, carrying you back toward denser streets. You step into a lane paved with rougher stones, your boots clicking unevenly as you walk. From somewhere ahead comes the sound of quiet singing, a man's voice low and steady, carrying a tune that might be older than the city itself. You follow it until you pass an open doorway where a cooper works late into the night. He hums as he fits the last hoop to a barrel, his hammer tapping in gentle punctuation to the song. The smell of worked oak and pitch fills the air. Past the cooper's shop, the lane forks. You take the left path which leads you through a series of tight bends until you arrive at a tiny courtyard hemmed in on all sides by tall houses. A single lantern burns on a post here, its light reaching only halfway up the surrounding walls. Against one wall sits a stack of firewood neatly split and arranged by size. Against another, a small cart waits with a load of kindling, its handles propped against the wall. From here, a narrow archway carries you into a street lined with modest shops. Their painted signs sway faintly overhead, a loaf of bread, a carved key, a bundle of yarn. One shop, its shutters still open, glows faintly from within. Inside, a young woman sits mending a net, the fine threads glinting in the lamplight. She looks up briefly as you pass her hands, never stopping their work, before returning to the intricate weave. The smell of tanned leather drifts toward you, leading you past a cobbler's workshop, where boots are lined neatly on a bench outside the door. Their polished surfaces catch the moonlight in small, bright glimmers. Just beyond, an open stable door reveals the shapes of two horses shifting in their stalls, the quiet rustle of hay under their hooves. One lifts its head as you pass, snorting softly, before returning to its feed. Your path bends again, and soon you find yourself walking beside another stretch of the city's wall. Here the stone is darker, streaked with the faint shine of moss where the damp gathers. A guard tower rises nearby, its torchlight spilling across the cobbles. You can hear the muffled voices of the watch inside, the scrape of a chair being moved, the quiet clink of a cup set on a table. Their vigil is steady, unbroken by the hours. Turning away from the wall, you pass into a neighborhood where the streets are laid in a looser pattern. The houses here have small yards behind wooden fences, the scent of turned earth lingering in the night air. In one yard, a low shed holds neatly stacked bundles of herbs drying from the rafters. In another, a cluster of clay pots stands ready for planting come spring. Even in winter's quiet, the promise of growth hums faintly here. The lane you follow tilts upward, carrying you toward the higher ground near the city's heart. The moonlight spills more freely here, catching the roofs and chimneys in pale silver. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rings softly, not the cathedral's grand tone, but a smaller, humbler voice marking the passing of another hour. You keep walking toward it, the sound folding itself into your steps, until you are part of the city's quiet rhythm once again. The bell's tone fades into the distance as you reach the crest of the slope. The streets here are a little broader, the houses set back just enough to leave a sliver of space for narrow gardens or low stone walls. In one such garden, a leafless tree spreads its bare branches like ink lines against the night sky. Beneath it, a small bench waits in silence, its surface silvered with dew. A lantern burns in the window of a nearby house. Through the warped glass, you glimpse the faint shimmer of movement, someone pacing slowly, perhaps in thought, perhaps in quiet prayer. The light flickers, as if answering the rhythm of their steps, spilling a pale glow over the frost-rimmed windowsill. As you walk on the cobbles here, sound sharper under your boots, the air carrying less of the river's dampness and more of the crisp scent of wood smoke. A large timber-framed house looms ahead, its upper stories jutting over the street like a watchful brow. Painted above the door is a simple symbol, a sheaf of grain bound with a ribbon. This is a merchant's home, one who deals in the city's lifeblood flour bread, perhaps even the leasing of mill rights. By day, wagons would rattle up to this doorway, but tonight it stands hushed, its heavy iron-bound door firmly closed. The street bends into a small plaza anchored by a public well. Its wooden cover is closed for the night, the pulley rope neatly wound and tied. Nearby, a bench sits beneath the overhang of a building's upper floor, sheltering it from the wind. A pair of men occupy the bench cloaks, pulled tight, their conversation low and measured. Their eyes flick toward you as you pass, then away again, a silent exchange, polite but edged with caution. From the plaza, you take a narrow spur street that drops gently downhill. Here, the houses are closer together again, their walls patched and weathered, their shutters rattling faintly in the breeze. In one doorway, a small clay lamp burns on a ledge, its flame steady in the stillness. You can smell the faint tang of olive oil from its wick. The air changes as you go, taking on the faint metallic note of worked iron. Before long, you pass the open frontage of a smithy. The forge is dark now, but the anvil sits squarely in the center, a black shape against the paler glow of banked embers. A scattering of horseshoes rests on a bench, their curved forms catching the moonlight in dull glimmers. Somewhere in the shadows, a chain creaks softly, perhaps a door shifting against its hinges in the wind. Beyond the smithy, the street flattens out, opening into a small marketplace surrounded by low shops. The stalls here are packed away, but a faint fragrance of crushed herbs lingers from the day's trade. You pause near one stall whose counter is dusted with faint green powder, perhaps from ground mint or dried thyme. From the far side of the square comes the muffled strum of a lute. Following the sound, you find a narrow alley ending in a tiny courtyard. A single torch burns on the wall, its light pooling on the cobbles below. Beneath it sits a man, his head bent over his instrument, coaxing slow, thoughtful notes into the night. The music seems to ripple through the still air, each note settling like a pebble dropped into a calm pond. You linger until the song trails into silence, the player lowering his hands in quiet satisfaction. Returning to the square, you take another street, this one rising gently toward the city's center. The houses grow larger again, their fronts adorned with carved lintels and shutter panels painted in faded colors. You pass a door flanked by two unlit lanterns, their ironwork shaped into curling vines. It feels like the entrance to a guild hall, proud, dignified, and firmly closed for the night. Halfway up the rise, you notice a faint glow spilling from an open doorway. Inside, a baker works alone, shaping dough on a wide wooden table. His hands move with steady confidence, folding and turning the soft mass before setting it aside in neat rounds. The smell of yeast and flour hangs warmly in the air, a promise of bread for the city come morning. At the top of the hill, the street levels out into a small terrace overlooking the rooftops. From here, you can see the cathedral's spire cutting a dark shape against the sky, its tip crowned faintly in moonlight. Closer by the glow of scattered lanterns picks out the lines of streets you've walked tonight, their light flickering like faint constellations. You descend the far side of the hill into a quieter quarter. The houses here are smaller but well kept, their shutters latched neatly, their thresholds swept clean.